Hello, everyone, one and all. You guys, let's keep it Midwest. Welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me is Phil McKenzie, as usual, if not always. Phil?
I'm here.
You're here? You didn't say that's me or anything of the sort, but to be fair, I didn't really give you a pause. And we know you, Phil. You needed an especially long pause.
It's natural politeness. I don't want to butt in.
Yeah, I don't get that. Welcome to Heavy Hands. We're through the malaise of whatever the hell that was last week. As it played out, as is often the case, because there's a reason we like professional fighting. Some good fights, but doesn't mean we had to be excited about it. Doesn't mean I'm gonna remember them. That I'm not gonna have to each time any one of those undercard fighters comes up again. I'm not gonna have to go back and essentially watch the fight for the first time again. So, but we're done. We're on to UFC 284. And this is how it works these days, Phil. They rob the fight night cards in order to absolutely stack the pay-per-views. And that is why UFC 284 has not one, not two, but 2.5 good fights. It's shockingly thin. It's very dense at the top. There's 3 fights that I'm super interested in, and none more so than the genuine super fight in the main event. But what is going on with these undercards? Fortunately, we're not going to complain about it the whole show because we don't have to talk about it. There's enough meat on the top 3 fights, but still. What?
Yeah, I don't know. There seems to be something where they're literally just saving all their good and fun fighters for the second half of the year for some reason.
They couldn't even... The most interesting fight on that Blanchfield-Santos card that they announced is literally Jim Miller versus TBD.
Boy.
They haven't even found an opponent for Jim yet. They just know he's Jim Miller and he wants to fight. And the main event. I am genuinely interested in Aaron Blanchfield. But anyway, UFC 284 does feature, sitting atop the void, Islam Makhachev, the lightweight champion, and Alexander Volkanovski, the featherweight champion and pound-for-pound #1, as I have been saying for some time, but I think now more people have no choice but to agree. It also has featherweights Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett in the co-main event slot, and then we have got new hardcore fan favorite, for good reason, Jack Della Maddalena, the body-punching, swarming, combination-throwing maniac himself, taking on the lanky giant Randy Brown. Those are 3 very interesting fights. As I said, I'm not going to waste any more breath complaining about how they are the only interesting fights. Of which I'm painting with a pretty broad brush anyway, but let's be honest. The top 3 is a world away from the rest of this card.
It is not stacked, unfortunately.
It's not
because
stacked.
It deserves to be.
It deserves to be. Yeah, this should be, and it's one of those cases where clearly it doesn't need to be, because I've been looking forward to this event solely for the main event. So really, any other good fights on here does feel kind of like, just feels like cream, but, yeah, you feel like a fight of this magnitude should have lots of marketing, should have lots of exciting lead up to it on the night of the fights. And it's just sort of, as most things are in the UFC these days, it's just sort of happening now.
Yeah, I might have said this before, but honestly, this is the most compelling cross fight.
Yes.
Cross weight class fight that we've had since... arguably since GSP BJ Penn. I think it's very, other than that, it's in pretty rarefied air. It's that.
I would say since
Daniel
Holloway.
Cormier, John Jones.
Holloway Poirier. Holloway Poirier was very compelling at the time. I was really excited to see that. And it was the same idea, featherweight versus lightweight.
It wasn't literally like these guys are the best in the world.
That's true. These guys are in some... Well, I don't know. I thought Holloway was, certainly.
Yes, Holloway certainly was the best featherweight. But, yeah, other than that, it's Cormier Jones and, I mean, maybe Alvarez McGregor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even that. Yeah, I'm really interested
I
in
think,
this.
it was hard to look at. It was hard to look at Alvarez and think, here's the, however many fights he was removed from losing to Cowboy Cerrone and having a dismal couple of bouts with Melendez and Pettis, and think, well, this is the undisputed best fighter in his weight class.
Yeah.
But these two have both just been looking better and better over time. They both absolutely crushed genuinely great opposition in their last fights. It's a tantalizing style clash. I mean, it's honestly, it's one of the best, most exciting fights that's ever been made in MMA.
It's pretty cool. It's so cool that I haven't even found it in me to bitch about the fact that neither of them is defending their titles, which usually, no, not that they haven't or don't. Just that, usually that's like a bit of a sour undertone to a super fight.
Oh, sorry,
me.
I thought for the minute, I thought you meant that like there was no title on the line.
Oh no,
like,
I'm pretty sure.
Even possible?
I'm pretty sure the lightweight
Very
title.
scared for a second.
I'm pretty sure the lightweight title is definitely on the line. I just mean that often it's like, I wish their divisions were functioning, which is the champion's job, is to keep the conveyor belt rolling. And, but in this case, it's like Volkanovski just had the most impressive performance of his entire career in what I believe is his fourth title defense. So I'm like, yeah, go for it. You've earned it. Take a shot. Let's see what happens.
There's no one in featherweight that I'm desperate to see Alexander Volkanovski fight.
I'd like to see him fight Arnold Allen. I'd like to see him fight Josh Emmett, but
I don't need to see him just rack up defenses against guys I'm pretty sure he's going to beat.
Yeah, exactly. He's more than
similarly, Makhachev. What's he going to do? There's a roadblock of sort of aging action fighters that we've mentioned many times, which no one's getting through. And do I need to see him fight any of them? See him fight any of them again?
Yeah, and it's
Not
also
really.
the particulars of Islam's style too. It's like he has such a dominant style that when it's working, it is working the entire time, and there's nothing the opponent can do. That I'm just not, call this a positive spin on anti-grappler bias. I'm not that interested in seeing fights. In his case, I'm also pretty certain he's going to win against most of the likely contenders. I will say I would like to see him fight Beneil Dariush. I think that is a sneakily competitive fight that I'm very curious about. But yeah, I'm more than happy to get this super fight, more than I have been for basically any other champ versus champ matchup. And yeah, it's very tough. Islam Makhachev, as you said, I mean, these are two fighters who have managed the incredibly uncommon feat of just looking better and better as their careers have progressed and they face superior competition. Like, these are two guys who it is just in them to step up and put in their best performance after best performance, even as their opponents get, nominally tougher. They don't look like they're fighting tougher opponents, even though we logically know that they are.
So many fighters basically have their greatest performance is one where they take the belt and they can never recapture the magic again.
Mm-hmm.
That goes from sort of flash in the pans like Garbrandt to, debatably all-time greats like John Jones.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, potentially that might be true of Makhachev, but certainly not of Volkanovski, who's gone from looking incredibly good to literally looking like he might be the best fighter to ever do it. He might be the best ever,
yeah. Yeah, and then Makhachev, I suppose it could be the case. He could be a long arc version of Conor McGregor, where it just took him ages to get here, and he's been getting better, and this was a very long title run, and now he looks at his best form. Who knows? Maybe he falls apart on the defense. I don't think so. I don't know. It's just something with... Yeah,
doesn't strike me as that guy.
No, he doesn't. I think he is continuing to peak and may yet have higher peaks to reach as he defends his title, which I have the sort of same sadness hedge sneaking suspicion that he will do here, but I'm not certain of it. Because again, I think Volkanovski might be the best fighter ever. Pound for pound. So, yeah, I mean, let's try to get into it. This is a very thorny matchup to untangle, and it, of course, confronts our greatest weakness as analysts, which is just not being savvy enough grappling, having a savvy enough understanding of grappling technique to always suss out exactly like how difficult it is to just shut somebody out of that phase of the fight. Because like many Islam Makhachev fights, there's definitely the feeling, I mean, more than any of the others, there's definitely the feeling that if, stating the obvious, if he can't just out-grapple Volkanovski, he's not going to win, right?
Huh?
I can't imagine him outboxing Volkanovski for 5 rounds. Like a boxer who just gets better and sharper and smoother as the fight goes on.
I mean, so there was the idea before he fought Oliveira that, you know, if wasn't going to out-wrestle Oliveira, he was potentially going to be in trouble on the feet. But even then, there was still the general assertion that, like, many, many people have just run up to Charles Oliveira and just beamed him in the face.
Yeah, which he did, to his credit.
Yes.
He did it more than once.
I think I remember thinking after we'd recorded that episode, I think we probably haven't mentioned that people are just underpricing the fact that Makhachev could just bonk him.
You did say that, yeah. And you were right.
That is, I would be genuinely pretty shocked if that were the case. I mean, you know, anyone can get caught. But if he actually wins a primarily stand-up battle with Alexander Volkanovski, I'll be genuinely shocked.
Yeah. Yeah, I really don't think it's possible. I think the furthest his striking can take him in this fight is the age-old dynamic in MMA of it playing really effectively off the ever-present threat of his grappling boosting the success of his striking. But on its own, Islam's striking, I mean, unless he even if, like, I was going to refer to the Khabib fight with Ray Janal as like Khabib is just a boxer tonight. But even then, I think that is that was not a particularly deep striking performance. That was a finding the one range where I have this really effective weapon. Certainly I was impressed with Khabib's jab, having never seen it function that way before. But that was really like carving out a really narrow slice of striking and keeping Iaquinta stuck in it. And I think Islam's striking works more or less the same way. Islam throws a good jab, and he throws a good straight left, and then largely whatever strike comes after that is kind of a mess. Which isn't to say it can't be effective. And in fact, over the course of his fight with Chucky Olives, like the first right hook Makhachev threw against him, terrible. Truly terrible.
Is this the one where he's like throws a 3-punch combination and sort of gets stuck on one leg halfway through it?
Yeah, he's really awkward footwork. He just gets completely off balance. The boxing technique is not ingrained enough to have a fluid 3-punch combination. But I will say, as the fight went on, he actually kind of dialed down how much he was trying to put into that right hook, and it became a much more balanced and much more effective punch. And it was, in fact, the shot that he dropped Charles with when he went for that ill-advised flying knee. So even there, I think Makhachev has an ability to be a little anxious at the start and to settle in and smooth things out on the feet. But still, I think you put this man into a protracted striking exchange, he's not going to look comfortable or smooth. Nothing like Volkanovski. It is going to be, as effective as his grappling is, especially as the fight goes on, or as his striking is, I think will be heavily dependent on how much of a threat he can establish with his wrestling and grappling. That is the big question here. Yeah, no surprises to anybody listening, right? This is the story of every Khabib fight and every Islam Makhachev fight. You're just like, well, if he can do the thing he does, he's gonna win. and this just feels like a particularly pronounced version of that.
Because, I mean, in general, Volkanovski is obviously the smaller man moving up from the smaller weight class, but he's also, like, he's not even big for featherweight, let's be honest.
No, I think he is...
I mean, 5'6" he's been clearly undersized, or at least much shorter than all his opponents in the UFC, barring Chad Mendes. And
I will say, over the course of his title run, he has proven better and better, particularly fighting much longer, taller men. So that last Max Holloway fight, Chansung Jung has a monster reach, and Brian Ortega is huge. And all of these guys, this is your MMA's best example of a short guy who can still very comfortably outstrike people from range. His mastery of distance, his use of feints, his choice of weapons, the jabs and kicks, all perfect.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it, but he does have quite a similar game to, what's his face, John McDessie. It's just much, much better.
Yeah, he's like a supercharged John McDessie. He really is.
And yeah, as such, he can dictate from range in a way which I think very few short fighters can. You know, even great fighters like Chad Mendes, who have been short and stocky and so on, have still relied on bursting over distance in a way which, Volkanovski just doesn't have to. He can work his way inside because his fence and timing and understanding of angles and so on is just that good.
Yeah. And even before his striking was this sophisticated, I mean, of course, I was trying to watch all of the most testing grappling performances of his that I could find. Naturally, my eye was drawn first to the fight with Chad Mendes, although I think there are things to be taken away also from the Brian Ortega fight, certainly, and the Darren Elkins fight to a degree. But even then, I mean, I think that was like the first glimpse at how sophisticated Volkanovski's striking would become. That was him being very much like an aggressive counterpuncher. That was him really using his jab as the sort of chisel to work his way in and set up longer combinations. But it was still pretty crude compared to what it is now. And yet you could see the first jab he threw, you were like, oh, this man is just naturally exceptionally like accurate and has brilliant timing. So certainly the athletic gifts, as they did with previous featherweight GOAT, still the GOAT, but, you know, the guy that he reminds me of as a super athletic technician, Jose Aldo. The hyper-athleticism just boosts what is a fundamentally very, very sound striking game. So yeah, I have no doubts that if he can turn this into a striking match, he is going to outstrike Islam Makhachev. I will say that, you know, with the full certainty, knowing that if I'm wrong, I will look like an absolute fool because I'm 100% certain, but that's fine. I would be happy to be proven wrong in this instance because it would be one of the most impressive things I think I've ever seen. So yeah, what have you taken away, Phil, from Volkanovski's fights with grapplers, particularly larger grapplers, but also just exceptionally athletic, skilled grapplers such as Mendes?
Well, I mean, I think the basic thing is that we're looking a style matchup where a lot of people have sort of sadness hedged their way to saying, like, Volkanovski's going to lose it because he's much bigger than, because Makhachev is much bigger than him, he's going to get his hands on him, and so on. I think obviously this is a bit, this is kind of cope to an extent, because the question isn't really that, because the question is, when you look at Volkanovski's previous fights, do you see a bulletproof defensive wrestler?
Yeah.
Do you see Robert Whittaker? Do you see Jose Aldo?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
It is no.
It's not really. This is not what you see. You see a good defensive wrestler, and you see a very proactive defensive scrambler.
Yeah. I would say his scrambling is better than his wrestling, and his poise in those situations is a real credit to him. That this is not a man who ever freaks out when he is taken down. He's very methodical, but very urgent about getting back up. That's his best quality. But yeah, he's been taken down several times.
And this was obviously something which Sakura and Aldo share as well. They could get taken down. They're not superhuman, but
but
and they got taken down,
borderline.
they were also extremely methodical, and they just cycled through things you should do, extreme speed and and confidence.
Yeah, but borderline impenetrable takedown defense. I mean, Aldo is still, in that specific regard, he's still a notable league above Volkanovski. You can just look at their fights with Chad Mendes. I mean, Mendes, a better version of Mendes, who fought Aldo. A fresher version at the very least. And he hit a couple of really surprising takedowns, but even in the get-ups, Aldo was quicker to just completely destroy any hope of top control. And then otherwise, Mendes' shots just fucking bounced off of him. I mean, I distinctly remember the one where Mendes tried to shoot off the cage, and Aldo made it look like, this is Chad Mendes. This is a beast of an athlete who was like, we can say it, definitely on steroids too. And an exceptional collegiate wrestler. And he runs into Aldo's hips. Aldo very quickly, does the whole feeding him a single leg thing, frames in his head, and just sort of guides his shot past and gently pushes his face into the floor. It looks like a child trying to wrestle his dad. Volkanovski does not have that level of takedown defense. Few fighters do.
And he would go on to do exactly the same thing against Frankie Edgar.
Yes.
The other thing is that for most of the people that... So, I mean, Mendes, for example, is a very strong shot wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily particularly good top control artist.
No.
So the question is, basically he got Volkanovski down with a double leg, and then Volkanovski butt scooted back to the fence and then stood up. He can't do this against Islam.
Yeah.
The proclivities of both Islam and Khabib for just crushing people by the fence are well known. It's just not a viable way of getting up against them.
Yep.
Mendes kind of sits on Volkanovski's legs without engaging his own legs in any way, just sort of holds onto Volkanovski's hips. That's just not what's going to happen. Islam would control Volkanovski's legs with his own hips and would immediately just start stripping wrists the minute Volkanovski started to post.
Mm-hmm.
The fence, this is, as we've said many times, the fence is simply a death zone here.
Yep.
You just, even Aldo would have to call upon the second part of his takedown defense, which would be his cagecraft, to just stay away from the fence, because they are, both Islam and Khabib are absolute killers there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so I think, if you look back at the takedowns which have worked on Volkanovski, I think mostly it's not all bad news, because he's not, as said, he's not impenetrable in terms of his takedown defense, but they have all been kind of surprise shots.
Mm-hmm.
It's, rare that he's been taken down in the open without, he has, I think, very good instincts to respond to shots.
It's difficult to just get to the right range on him. I mean, a lot of them are counters. I mean, Ortega's, I think both of Ortega's takedowns were like kick, catch, punch, counter, knockdown takedowns. They weren't even genuine like knee taps. They were just a matter of timing with a counter.
So,
which Makhachev could do, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, so this is how Makhachev took down Bobby Green initially, I believe.
That
was a kick counter. But what Makhachev is probably going to want to do is because we know that Volkanovski, over the course of his evolution into who he is today, has become also much more of a kind of an outside fighter.
Mm-hmm.
His dismantling of Max Holloway was sort of the evolution of an approach which I think most people would have thought was madness against Max Holloway, which is just to draw him onto shots and counterpunch him.
Yep.
And that means, and I think, given how much of Volkanovski's takedowns have been, how many of them have been counters to things that he is doing.
Mm-hmm.
it does make you think, okay, he has a decent chance to stop takedowns if he's not, punching his way into them. Secondly, obviously, Islam isn't the shot takedown threat that Chad Mendes is.
Yeah.
I think he's much more of a snatch single guy.
And I would say most of his best takedowns are in clinches.
Yes.
Very similar to the Khabib process. Granted, we were greatly surprised when we said Khabib doesn't do shots. The shot isn't the takedown, it's the entry. And then he went in there and did masterful shot takedowns on Justin Gaethje. So, certainly possible. Let us not pretend that just because we know Volkanovski is exceptionally good at preparing and adapting to his opponents, is such an all-terrain fighter, that Makhachev himself can't make just one or two small tweaks that could completely change how threatening his ground game is.
And also, I think that the idea of him double-legging Volkanovski, not necessarily what he should be even aiming for at this point. Because I think the snatch single is probably fine. As long as he can get it, as long as Volkanovski's leg is there, it'd be a little difficult due to the differing stances, but I think his best route to winning the fight is Volkanovski is not by the cage, then at least somewhere around the perimeter with his back to it. He's not directly in the center. That's not really how he fights. I think it's best for Islam to pick up the snatch single and simply try and run him into the fence.
Although,
yeah,
go on.
And I think, honestly, that is almost certainly going to happen at some point. And at that point, I think Volkanovski is probably going to get taken down.
Well, I will say that if I had to pick out an area of wrestling defense where Volkanovski is strongest, I think he is actually a monster in the clinch. This is what really interests me, is that if Islam does not really prepare and drill extensively his timing to hit clean shots, which is typically what has gotten Volkanovski down, or alternatively, if he isn't looking to draw out kicks and counter them and turn those into takedowns, then the usual approach of getting the opponent up to the fence and then starting to threaten their balance from like 8 different directions at once and finding some kind of trip or leg entanglement or like throw by where he can get to the back or something, is actually going to be harder here than it is against a lot of his opponents, because Volkanovski is really strong in the clinch.
I still think he can do it. I mean, one of those takedowns that I think Ortega got was, I think, also pretty much the exact same inside trip that Islam got on Drew Dober. Yeah. It was, by the cage, double underhooks, just got his shoulder underneath his chin to stand him up, because, again, he's pretty short, and then just hooked behind his knee and threw him down. I think that the odds of, in the same way that, like, I don't think Islam, I would be shocked if Islam outstruck Volkanovski. I would be shocked if Volkanovski beats Islam without getting taken down 1 or 2 times.
Oh yeah, which he himself. I don't know if you've seen the footage coming out of his camp, but he has been saying that. I mean, very wisely, I think. Granted, I was struck by the fact that all the things he's saying here about how, I'm going to get taken down, I have to get back up. Basically, like, I have to be prepared for the bad positions. If I go in there, it's very wise. If I go in there thinking, if this happens, I'm dead, then that's just psychologically self-defeating. That's Adesanya's approach against Pereira. That happens so many times. You think, I need this to happen or else I'm losing. No, you have to be prepared to be losing in moments, because you are going to be losing sometimes. It doesn't mean you're necessarily having to lose the fight. But, as wise as that is, and as much as I do think Volkanovski has improved, was exactly what he said against Chad Mendes. And he did get taken down 3 times in that fight. I think stats only credits him with 2, but there are 3 takedowns in that fight. And as you said, I'm just not sure the same get-up approach, it would have to be a lot more sophisticated to succeed against Islam. And it will require a lot more energy, whether or not it is more sophisticated. And even in that fight, again, a worse version of Volkanovski, but still a very good fighter. Even in that fight, there was a moment where you saw him get taken down, and he almost accepted it. I think the third takedown, it was like there was a look of frustration on the man's face, and he went into that fight having prepared the exact same winning mindset that he is talking about having for this one. It's just such a progressive problem to be taken down the first time by Islam. And each one after that is just worse and worse and worse. So I don't know. A correction of the record, by the way. I was just, as I'm rolling footage on both of these guys, the takedown on Bobby Green, there was a kick caught, which turned into a clinch entry. Then we have Islam attempting a foot sweep, which is another very good takedown in his arsenal. Then we have him tying up in a clinch, breaking. Bobby Green tries to punch his way off the fence, and then it is, in fact, a pretty strong double leg shot, as Bobby Green is focused on trying to throw hands. And it's not like a Chad Mendes shot, but it is a shot where he gets in super deeply and can then kind of take his time getting the lift and finishing the takedown. So it is actually a double leg. So,
yeah. So I think, you know what? I think the more I've looked at this tape, I think at the tape for these two, the more I've found myself a little more actually encouraged for Volkanovski.
Really? I'm having the opposite feeling. Tell me why, please.
So I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to pick him here.
Mm-hmm.
Broadly coming into this, my reaction was the same as, the one you get, the one that many people have had, is that he's not a bulletproof defensive wrestler. He needs to be a bulletproof defensive wrestler. It's kind of, he's not, he's at a size and probable strength disparity. He's probably going to lose. I think the Sarukian fight is an interesting one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a fight where, like, a stocky, endlessly energetic scrambler just hung with Makhachev the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I think what really struck me about it, looking back on it, was how many of the exchanges, how many of the grappling exchanges were initiated by Arman Sarukian?
Yeah, that if he had not initiated them. Now, granted, I will say I think as a grappler wrestler, takedown defense might be Sarukian's weakest area too. Certainly you look at that fight with Gamrot, and it's like, the takedown, the only reason Gamrot won that robbery decision are because he was able to complete several shots. They didn't lead to any meaningful control, but yeah, kind of similar to Volkanovski, and it does make you wonder that fight. How would this look if Arman just didn't want to wrestle?
And he just stayed on the outside and was, 5 times better as a striker.
Yeah, easily.
And it just made me think, like, that we haven't had anyone who could really punish Islam's tendency to want to have the fight at a simmer. Because I think he's I think against Oliveira, he did a great job of sort of taking the pace sort of directionally, and by refusing to concede things like the striking, he didn't just run straight forward and try and grapple with Oliveira. He did do a great job of dictating the fight, but it was one where it wasn't at the kind of torrid pace that Makhachev Sarukian was at.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the interesting thing about that fight was simply that when it reached that kind of pace, Makhachev sort of let Sarukian come into him at all points.
Mm-hmm.
Really stopped initiating. I think partially because he was like, he knew that Sarukian was just coming into him, but partially because I think that's just who he is. He's a natural counterpuncher.
Mm-hmm.
This is not necessarily in terms of being a striker, but just in terms of how he wants to approach the grappling. I think this is in part because, his main mentor / sparring partner was Khabib, who was, pressure incarnate kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Khabib would just break people down from top position, Makhachev simply sort of pins them with as much of his weight as possible and then says, here's the tiny, shows them a tiny chink of light and then waits very patiently for them to start walking towards it.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, against Sarukian, you kind of saw that happen. I find myself wondering, Volkanovski, if he can do what he says he says he's going to, if he can keep standing up, and he can be someone who is always doing things in a fight.
If he can just compete well enough in the scrambles to not get crushed, then he is going to have the luxury of getting to dictate entries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that Makhachev will then, I think, instinctively start to pull back on his tendency to kind of wait for things to happen a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And Volkanovski is the things that he does aren't even like strikes. It's feints. He's very good at feinting in a way which no one that Makhachev has ever fought is.
No.
In a way which in many ways no one in MMA is.
Yeah, honestly.
And this is part of what makes Volkanovski someone who is able to tire people out. But the other part of who Volkanovski is that he is completely untirable, or at least has been so far. I think the Mendes fight is probably the most ragged we've ever seen him.
The last round of Ortega as well. Granted, he basically went for the finish at 3 distinct points. And it was otherwise a torrid pace entirely throughout the fight, and it was a miracle that Ortega was able to muster the will to press him in the 5th. But he definitely took his foot off the gas there. And looked a bit tired. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it happen. I also think because he's so calm and so principled as a technical fighter, I trust no one more to find second wins or to look more tired than he functionally is. But yeah, he seems more tireless than most of the people Islam's beaten. He's a much better, busier striker while being capable of not having every bit of business be a massive risk with the feinting and the jabs and the body punches, a lot of really good options to enter in with strikes. I will also say, we always have to point this out, he is someone that I would least suspect to have any issues with the fact that Islam is a southpaw, which I have to imagine has figured into a lot of people's tentativeness in striking with him. Here's a southpaw who's jabbing me and throwing straight left hands, and I have to run after him. I have to commit to a huge right hand. That's what you do. And then you get into the clinch, and soon it's over. And Volkanovski, masterful range striker, fighting somebody who's really not much bigger than, if at all, than Brian Ortega or Max Holloway, at least in terms of
certainly
height.
Not taller.
Yeah,
than Max
yeah,
Holloway.
not in terms of height or reach.
I think Islam is 5'10". I think Holloway is 5'11". Is that correct?
That sounds right. But yeah, he's going to jab the southpaw. He's going to counter the left hand with the right hook, or with the left hand with the left hook. He's going to find little, boxers openings that exist that just the vast majority of MMA strikers are not capable of exploiting.
I think, that calmness is that you mentioned, I think, is in many ways the root of his cardio.
Yes.
He simply, when everyone panics, they lose a bit of their sort of mental gas tank.
And just based on what I've seen of his training, I wouldn't be surprised if this is somehow the most fit cardio-wise Volkanovski has ever been for a fight. Because his training looks grueling.
I think we just know he just doesn't panic his way out of it.
Exactly. Now, again, it's Islam, and I think many people have thought, I'm not going to panic. And there may just come a point, like I said, in that Chad Mendes fight, I think he kind of walked up to the edge of that. This is a lot of supposition. This is just going off of facial expressions and body language. And Lord knows he didn't give in. He fought his way back up and turned on the gas like 3 times as much as soon as he got back to the feet. So I don't think he was broken, but I do think there's enough reason to think he's human. It can happen. Islam has the style that makes it happen. But Islam's, to this day, I would never call his striking anything more than serviceable. And in some specific aspects, I would say it's quite bad. It is only serviceable because of the grappling. And I don't know, man. Yeah, if it's, this is a long, long way of saying it's a true outcome fight to a degree. Volkanovski's so well-rounded, that it's not just a true outcome fight, but it still just hinges on how much success Islam can have with his grappling. I mean, I think I'm going to chicken out and pick Islam. He is the bigger man. He himself is a far more patient and methodical grappler than anyone else who has ever taken Volkanovski down. And it just worries me to see that Chad Mendes fight and to know that, yes, a lesser version of Volkanovski, but just to know that he was well prepared. He had the same win condition in mind regarding the wrestling. And I think, it probably only worked as well as it did because it's Chad Mendes, not Islam Makhachev. Like, the last takedown, in fact, where Volkanovski was frustrated, Mendes basically gave it up himself. It wasn't even like Volkanovski really forced the scramble that led him back to his feet. Mendes just doesn't... It's not in his heart to want to just sit on top of somebody in one position. He wanted to transition. He wanted to create a new threat, and that is when Volkanovski got back up. It was not really an initiative created by him. And then there's the fact that, even in that performance, I thought I saw just the first signs of a rare Volkanovski maybe thinking about sort of losing his poise, losing his mental sharpness, his calm. And I just, it'd be insane to think that that's not possible. As impressive as he is, if he loses this, I'm not going to suddenly think he's not the number one pound for pound, but the reason pound for pound exists, and I think Islam's style combined, I do still think the size has to be a factor, just because of how Islam's style operates. He is just the most controlling grappler in the sport. So being bigger cannot be anything but an advantage in that context. And so I think I still have to pick him.
I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is the way that almost all fighters look a bit shaky when they go into a new weight class for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when they've been hitting at a certain level for at their previous weight class.
Granted, Volkanovski has been a lightweight.
Yeah.
And more than a lightweight if you listen to Joe Rogan. But
yes,
it's been a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different. I think being someone, you get used to the pressure and feeling of a UFC fight, and even the pressure and feeling of a UFC championship fight, and you get used to carrying a certain amount of weight with you in there, and feeling a certain way, and so on, and an understanding of what the strength and speed involved is. I think it takes almost everyone a fight or two to adapt. I think, given who he is, given that mindset, I think Volkanovski is probably one of those people that I would actually trust to look genuinely good in his first fight, just because you get the impression his preparation is so obsessive that he is simultaneously also just extremely unfazable. I
mean, almost certainly, just knowing what kind of personality he is, almost certainly he did more than one practice cut to this new weight.
Yep.
Over the course of this. I mean, he's known this fight was his next fight for a long time now. So, I also have more faith in Volkanovski to deal with Islam and to deal with the weight change than I would many other fighters, because again, I think he may in fact be the best fighter I've ever seen. But it's still just, if he was moving up to fight Dustin Poirier, scary as that sounds, like Max Holloway did, I think I'd pick him. It's the fact that he's moving up and the bigger man has Islam Makhachev style. I just don't trust Volkanovski he's never ever dealt with that particular kind of fighter before at that level.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, it would be a remarkable legacy defining.
Oh my God.
I mean, it would be pretty much the best, I would say it probably the best win anyone's ever gotten in mixed martial arts.
It would be up there. Although I would already say that his third fight with Max Holloway was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. And I was already calling him pound for pound number one well before that.
So, I think I'm just going to have to also just ask Volkanovski to surprise me one last time. Because I just think for all that we've been talking him up, we've been talking Volkanovski up, Makhachev is a remarkable fighter as well.
Yep.
So I always remember there was a quote from, I think it's Yuri Simoes. It's like a 3-time ADCC champion, or at least maybe 3 weight class ADCC champion.
Okay.
And an incredible grappler, and he was people asked him, you've rolled with Islam and so on, how good is he? And he said he's one of the best grapplers I have ever trained with in my life. If he went into ADCC, I think he would probably win his weight class. Islam is an absolutely fantastic grappler, and not one to take. As I said, his lack of risk taking also means that on the top position that he's going to be less likely to get tired out by Volkanovski constantly scrambling from underneath him, because he's going to give Volkanovski less opportunities to do so.
Yeah,
that aren't immediately beneficial to how Islam wants to operate.
Yeah,
he's not going to be looking to try and submit or crush or even strike Volkanovski until he knows that he's in until he's got him in check, basically.
That he is stuck. Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you ask Volkanovski about ADCC, he'd say, I love ADCC. My favorite band. Because they're Australian.
Thank you, Connor.
Love Brian Johnson. Oh, God. I like his little hat. Yeah. It's just the fact that Islam himself, it's been such a long climb. And it's just the fact that, I have doubted the man many times, as a couple particular members of our somehow devoted listenership have not missed. But he, like Volkanovski, I do think, even though he hasn't defended yet, he is the same kind of psychology, that he also has just stepped up each time and somehow has just gotten better and more dominant. Like he has come into his own. This is prime Islam Makhachev. And if you want to praise Volkanovski for his poise and his calm and his, all he really has on Islam is well-roundedness. And Islam functionally does not need well-roundedness the same way Volkanovski does. Because, his game is not about letting all the things happen. It's about letting only exactly what he wants to happen. And it is that slow cooking approach to grappling. It is that, it is honestly I wouldn't pick, Volkanovski over Khabib, I don't think, especially because Khabib is just I think it's still a significantly better athlete than Islam. But it is in some ways, I think, an advantage he has over Khabib in matchups like this, that he will not even look to posture up and land strikes. He will not look to immediately press the advantage and try to break the opponent by force. He will as you said, he is the grappling equivalent of like an aggressive counterpuncher, where it's like you are being pressured, you're being controlled, but you have to make the first mistake before I'm going to take any risks to take advantage of this position. And it's just a very, very tough style, obviously, for anyone to deal with. And I think Volkanovski kind of has to knock him out, which could happen. It's happened before. Islam's not a good defensive striker. He can get hit clean. Volkanovski is a serious puncher, very fast. Could happen, but it would require some measure of luck, I think. It would not just be down to Volkanovski's skill for that to happen.
I still think there's a possibility that Volkanovski can just wear him out.
Maybe,
By just, one of those things in those drills that we've seen is that he's constantly going back and forth between striking and grappling and striking and grappling. And said, I think another thing which probably keeps me on the side of Makhachev is that in some ways, even though it's got things that Volkanovski can take away, that fight with Tsarukian, also the fact that it was just such a torrid pace that Makhachev just came out on top.
It would certainly be a rude awakening for Islam. I don't know how he would handle it psychologically if this was the first fight where the other guy, he gets tired before the other guy, because he has that same dynamic as Khabib. Where, he's, especially as the fight heats up or the more scrambles there are, he will match that pace, whatever pace you bring to him, with the understanding that it's going to break you before it breaks him. And it would be absolutely unbelievable and incredibly impressive if Volkanovski has something like the bad start that everyone has against Islam and comes back. It's possible. Could be like
I think we've mentioned that Islam's lack of well-roundedness may in fact cause him to get tired out in prolonged exchanges, but it has to happen. I think in the end this is a matchup between, if not the best striker ever to do it in MMA, then an absolute lock for top 3.
Yes.
And if not the best wrestler and grappler to ever do it, and again, probably a lock for top 3.
Probably, yeah.
It is a phenomenal style clash. Like, as you can't say enough good things about this fight. People getting upset because they might like Volkanovski more and they're worried he's going to win or he's too big. Like, it's time to touch grass a bit, because you just got to appreciate what a fantastic match it is. Like, how rare it is. This is the kind of stuff that you get into MMA to watch. Best against the best. The people who look untouchable in their given area going up against each other. The style clashes that you can't get in boxing as much as you can get the longer drawn out and more kind of storyline rich outs. You don't get these kind of absolutely baffling style matchups. It is an incredible fight. It's one I am still picking Makhachev in, but if you can't get excited for this, like, what are you here for? Yeah,
right. This is really MMA. And MMA, as it has since the very beginning, and why do I like it? Because of this. No matter how many times you think it's becoming a striker's sport, the grapplers just find a way to win. I refuse to believe that grappling is in fact better or more useful than striking. I will not concede. But MMA seems to cyclically think that it definitely is a trump. So we'll see. It'll be okay. I'm more of a fan of Volkanovski than Makhachev, as impressed as I've been. I like Volkanovski. I love his style. I like his personality. But he'll still be featherweight champ, if you're out there gnashing your teeth about the prospect of him, it's fine. Come on. It's cool. Get excited.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is nearly an hour on a fight that deserves it far, far more than anything else in this card, which is not to say that we don't have 2 interesting fights coming up next. They are just going to have to be covered significantly more briefly. Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. And then after that, Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown. All of that coming up.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Then welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about the co-main event of UFC 284, a featherweight contenders bout between Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett. And really, what this fight represents to me is just the final nail in the self-made coffin of Phil McKenzie's hypocrisy. Josh Emmett, a fighter it took you ages to accept even as a fellow member of the human race. You know, he had to put on numerous great performances for you to forgive him for the crime of existing. Meanwhile, Yair Rodriguez is out there being an athletic doofus who can't do anything particularly well, but does it all very athletically. And you never had a problem with him. Why? Because he's hot.
He's a super handsome man.
It's hot privilege, and Phil McKenzie has been exposed. So, I guess now you're going to pick Yair because he's more handsome.
We're going to pick Yair because he's more handsome.
Yeah. I'm going to pretend it's for other reasons, though. I am, as much as I've been the dude banging the Josh Emmett drum all this time, and I mean, especially since the Shane Burgos fight, which is still an incredible...
Saying that right now there's something else you'd rather be banging.
Yeah. Yair is like that. You just watched the second season of White Lotus. Yair is like Theo James. That's my guy. Excuse me. Yeah, no, I mean, as much as I've been impressed with Josh Emmett, I have never ever seen him in a matchup remotely like this. There are a few matchups that really replicate all the weirdness of Yair, but what I really mean is like a large kicker, who's light on his feet, insanely durable. That helps always against Emmett. I just don't know that I really have a lot of faith in Josh Emmett to handle that. I gotta see it, especially because I've seen him like get his legs kicked out from under him too many times. And yes, I've seen him adjust to it, but just knowing the openings are there, knowing what Yair did to like Jeremy Stevens, I just have this feeling, Phil, that Yair is just going to be bouncing kicks off of Josh Emmett for a lot of this fight. And if they're bouncing off his arms, if some of them are being checked, whatever, I don't think it matters to Yair. I think he will just slam full power kicks into Josh Emmett as many times as he can. And as long as he can take the shots that come back at him, which I have no reason to think he can't as of yet, it's kind of looking like a rough matchup for Josh Emmett. In a way that somehow I didn't expect until I took one look at it, and that was my vibe. That was my feeling. So we'll see if we can correct that at all. But it still surprised me that it was one of those where I had a completely different impression of who's the good fighter here. And a helpful reminder that it just isn't always about who's like the better fighter, who has the better process, et cetera, et cetera. It's about styles, and it's about physicality, and it feels to me that Yair has the right combination of both to have the advantage.
Yeah. So I think that, it's like if you had Calvin Kattar versus Yair Rodriguez, you'd be like, oh yes, of course Calvin Kattar is more skilled than Yair Rodriguez. Am I going to pick him? No.
Yeah.
Because you know what would happen if he fought Yair Rodriguez.
Yeah. He would get his calf destroyed, certainly.
And, he would just would have the same thing that happened to him against, what's his face? The guy that I actually hate now, Chikadze.
Chikadze.
Rodriguez has seemingly fixed most of his gas tank issues and is even more potent than Chikadze, and it would just end up with he's getting punted out of the ring. But yeah, so I think there's two real dynamics which are dangerous for each fighter here. And I think it's just a question of which dynamic is more dangerous for which fighter. So I think primarily Emmett is a guy who wants to move around on the outside and then look for a kind of favorable angle whilst the opponent comes in, and then just burst out at them and cover a shocking amount of space and then just punch them in the face or counterpunch. And yeah, just the main problem is that he likes to hang out and wind up. And whilst he's hanging out and winding up, Rodriguez is just going to boot him repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to see this not happening. And I think that is probably, as you've mentioned, I think that's really the core dynamic. That's the one that matters more. I think the other one is what does Rodriguez do once he's people, or once he needs to escape, or once they close distance on him? And we know what the answer to that is. He runs backwards.
He sort of flops around.
Yeah.
He's gotten better at flopping around, too.
Yeah.
No doubt Yair is one of those fighters who's not necessarily gotten much more technical, although I think his technique has improved, but has certainly has developed a much better feel for what the danger zones are in his fights and how to respond to them. Certainly even against Max Holloway, he was showing off, if not great technical defense, then defensive instincts and feel and responding to the threats, which is a good sign for him as a developing fighter. He is better than he used to be. But yes, he does.
He was also simply running away at times.
Yes, he was literally turning his back and trying to get cute and yeah. Like I said, not great defensive technique at all.
Yeah, he's gotten better at it, but his broad defensive techniques are throw a flurry of punches, or simply cover up entirely, or just run.
Yeah,
just turn and run. None of this seems like it would be a great idea against Josh Emmett.
No.
Even unlike Max Holloway, right? Holloway is a very offensively potent fighter who will, take angles and work in on people and so on. He's not a other distance kind of guy. He doesn't really need to be most of the time. He's pretty tall, but he's not someone who will chase and explode over distance throwing combinations. Josh Emmett is 100% that person.
Mm-hmm.
If Yair Rodriguez goes, just sprinting backwards, there's a really strong chance Josh Emmett will just keep with him and just belt him.
Yeah.
Potentially as he's turning his face in the other direction and doesn't see it coming.
Yeah. Could look like a Mark Hunt Czech Congo style knockout. Just a weird, awkward shot as Rodriguez literally is not looking at what's coming.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so this dynamic happened a lot in Rodriguez's fight with Korean Zombie.
Mm-hmm.
It's that he just tried, he would just run away and Zombie would just chase after him and just punch him repeatedly. Eventually, it did end up with Zombie getting KO'd, but that was honestly about as close to a fluke as you're ever going to get.
Still the most improbable KO of all time.
Hmm. It came off, Rodriguez's terrible defensive reactions that had sort of built that KO in that weird way.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't an accident.
Bending at the waist.
But it wasn't an accident, but it was stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of exactly what you said. It was him adapting to his own weird tendencies. So that he's,
right.
When he's bending at the waist and can't see what's going on, he will occasionally just throw out an up elbow.
Mm-hmm. Or a around the back.
Yeah, I think
elbow.
that's Emmett's best case scenario. It's that he just replicates most of the Korean Zombie fight with just driving Rodriguez backwards and just punishing him for his tendency for linear retreats and to just Yes, Rodriguez is more likely to counterpunch than he has been before. But I mean, even in the zombie fight, he's happy to like, or at least not happy, but he will exchange punches when he's moving backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And if Emmett can make himself do that, just consistently jace Rodriguez and punch him whenever he gets into range, then I think he can 100% win the decision.
Mm-hmm.
I think, fortunately, Emmett, I guess unfortunately in general, I probably do like him more as a fighter than Rodriguez now.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately. I think Rodriguez, more than anything else, has simply fixed up the gas tank issues, which were the only thing stopping him from being considered an incredible 10 out of 10 athlete in every phase.
Mm-hmm.
That he had a horrid fight with Max Holloway, which mostly didn't go his way. He looked fine.
Yep.
Had lots of grappling, and he was fighting off the back foot for most of it. He just kept throwing high power kicks, and he has an insane gas tank.
Yep. And he has in other fights
and
too.
He's willing to lean on it more.
It's really only been periodic that he has had gas tank issues. In fact, here is one thing I think we need to mention. The gas tank issues have really only ever been exposed in fights where he has had to have long grappling sequences.
That's the thing. Holloway wrestled him a ton.
It's true.
Yeah, that was
that's
like
true.
The most wrestling heavy performance we've seen from Max Holloway, and even then,
yeah,
Rodriguez looked broadly fine.
Yeah, he was kind of self-destructing against Jeremy Stevens, who wrestled him. Whereas way before the Holloway one, he did have the ridiculous fight that is vanished from the face of the earth with Alex Caceres.
Oh yeah.
I should look again. Is that on Fight Pass? For some reason, it's just been impossible to find on any of the official platforms for years. But that was an absolutely insane pace at altitude, if I recall correctly, either in Colorado or Mexico City, maybe. And
I think it was Mexico City.
Mm-hmm. So, I think he's always had the potential to have that kind of absolutely ludicrous cardio. It's true that Holloway wrestled him, but I think we would be remiss not to guess that Josh Emmett is very likely to come into this one having prepared to wrestle. It's not something he usually does. Lord knows I've joked often enough about the time that the Team Alpha Male side of his camp wanted him to wrestle with Mirsad Bektic. And I like to think I had a small part in the decision to, how about we go and knock Mirsad out instead? But this seems like an obvious candidate fight for him to bring back the wrestling. I don't know that I trust it to win in the fight. It's not how he usually wins. He is a Team Alpha Male fighter, even when he has wrestled people like, say, Scott Holtzman, certainly not the hardest guy in the sport to take down. This was years ago, by the way. That was in 2016. That's the most takedowns he's ever got in a fight by a long shot. And that's because Scott Holtzman, again, doesn't stop shots that well. But he had to get 8 of them. He wasn't holding Scott Holtzman down. So yeah, I kind of just have to pick Yair. I just think we're on like athletic parity, and he's much longer and has a game which is way more attuned to that range. And while I think Emmett has developed some surprisingly good defensive boxing instincts and boxing defensive techniques, even in the performance where he showed those things off to the utmost against Shane Burgos, the first 3 minutes of that fight at least were defined by him getting his leg completely chewed up by kicks. And I just think Yair, he just does nothing but full power kicks. His kicks are crushingly powerful. How many times did he hurt Jeremy Stevens to the body in their second fight with that left kick? So yeah, I gotta pick Yair. I think he's gonna kick Josh Emmett's liver. He's gonna kick his legs. He might kick him in the goddamn head. It's not like you can't hurt Josh Emmett. This could be Yair's first head kick finish since Andre Fili.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones where I've looked at it and it's pushed me more towards the guy that I initially didn't favor.
Yeah.
I think that that zombie fight, as I said, I think its ability to cover space makes him more suited to take on Rodriguez than, say, someone like Keita, because he can drive him back and he can punish him for it, whereas Keita would just simply be plodding after him the whole time and would just get torn to pieces. It's just the fact that unless he's trained very specifically to counter kicks with punches and to be proactive, to not give Rodriguez the space that he needs. If he fights his normal fight, he's just going to get chewed up by one of the most dynamic kickers that we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst I do think that he's incredibly physically tough and incredibly mentally tough, so is Rodriguez. And even if Emmett can chase Rodriguez down on an exit and crack him, alongside all his other many physical gifts, is Rodriguez's insane chin.
Yep, that is really the main difference maker, too. Rodriguez is insanely durable. Has he ever been finished with strikes? I'm going to say no.
Frankie Edgar
KO'd
him from the top position, but that is a
tritive TKO.
It's clearly a mentally giving up performance rather than a.
And in fact, that was actually a doctor stoppage.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
He made it to the end of the round, and the doctor stopped it, probably because, if I recall, his eye was closing. Or he just looked like a broken man. He was knocked out with punches in a fight I have not seen in 2012. I don't know how relevant those kinds of results ever really are.
A lot of it's just, they just get shocked.
Yep. He was very young in his career, very young in his life. I have seen him take massive shots from Jeremy Stevens and Korean Zombie, and while not nearly as big a puncher, I have seen him take many, many shots from Max Holloway and weather all of these with really no signs of ever even being hurt. So I think he's tough enough to, he's probably tough enough not to just get KO'd flat by Josh Emmett. And at that point,
outrageously durable, one of the most, probably a lock for one of the top 10 most physically gifted fighters we've ever seen in the UFC.
Yeah, he's certainly in that echelon. All right, so it's Yair. It's the hot one. And let me just quickly look over these pictures of him. Okay, this all seems to be in order. Yeah, that's a good reaction. Sucking my teeth, because it's all I've got to suck.
All right, just look at some Emmett to cool you down now.
Okay, that does the trick. Oh, he's smiling. I don't like it. Yeah, his smile is chilling. Okay, great. All right, I'm evened out. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, welterweights Jack Della Maddalena and Randy Brown after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And we're back. Jack Della Maddalena, Randy Brown. Phil, you seem confident. I'm going to let you kick this one off. What's your read on this fight? Go.
Randy Brown is someone who seems to have found a measure of consistency in the UFC. Or I find myself looking at it and thinking, it's due to matchups, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of those ones where you like, and he is, I think I might have said it before, but like, he's like Neil Magny in that he has a very different fighter to Neil Magny, yet has exactly the same poisonous matchups Neil Magny does. He has a completely different idea of what he wants to do as a fighter. He's much more dynamic and so on and so forth, but like it's still just like wrestling and low kicks and pressure. Which makes like Jack Della Maddalena, I think, a really interesting test.
Yeah, and just power punchers as well. I mean, this is not a guaranteed thing that loses him a fight, but it is definitely a problem area for him. Guys who just get inside his range and deck him when he's like trying to be cute with his defense and whatnot.
But, you know, he beat Chaos Williams.
Exactly, yeah. He narrowly beat Chaos Williams, a fight he was this close to throwing away. And he definitely beat, but still had a really competitive fight with Francisco Trinaldo, another a much stockier, in fact, power puncher. And then there's, Luque, Price. Big punchers have beaten him as well.
Definitely. I mean, the Price thing is still just insanely weird.
Yeah, we talked about, we just said the Rodriguez zombie KO was the most improbable KO of all time, but it still is, but that kind of thing is up there too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a really well-judged fight for Jack Della Maddalena. Because he doesn't actually fit into the archetypes which Randy Brown has traditionally struggled with. And more than that, it really offers some, like, hard questions for him to answer. Because they could have simply given Della Maddalena just, better and better boxers, for example, as he just moved up the... Randy Brown is himself, despite the fact that he can't defend them. He's still quite a good kicker and low kicker. And he's really nasty in the clinch.
Yep.
Which means that this is as Maddalena has been something of a pocket operator, means that he's going to need to navigate past the low kicking range without being able to just rely on a jab, because he might get his legs kicked out, and B, he'll have to operate in the pocket without getting beaten up in the clinch.
Yep.
So, as I said, I think it's a really well-judged match to see where Jack Della Maddalena is. And as mentioned, Randy Brown can have a measure of confidence. He's got actually quite a good little run going at the moment. I think his last loss was to Vicente Luque, yes, which was 5 fights ago. Being said, I probably expect Jack Della Maddalena to win because he is better.
He does seem better. Is it just because we just like his style more? I don't know, but he does seem like a very. It is almost a boxer's version of what like Islam does to people. He just seems exceptionally good at just guiding people into his fight. Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think you said they could have just matched up with better boxers. Randy Brown kind of is that sort of matchup as well. I think it is in that way a very testing but still reasonable step up, given how impressive Della Maddalena has been so far. But for all the moments when he wasn't just sort of like toying around and like losing focus, he showed some really great boxing skill against Chaos Williams and against Francisco Trinaldo. I think these are some of the best striking performances we've seen out of him. Certainly he showed shades of the same approach in his fight with Barberena. Randy Brown did, I mean. And
I mean, yeah, he put Barberena to pieces in a way which I picked him to win that fight, but I didn't expect him to absolutely slaughter Barberena in the way that he did.
Yeah, and then against Williams, like, again, there was a balance he struck in that fight. I think this is a major problem for Randy Brown, and probably why he is so matchup dependent. Like, often the case with guys like that is that they are extremely tactically minded and can therefore be suckered into somebody else's fight pretty easily because, Randy Brown is a well-rounded fighter and he has a lot of good technical ideas everywhere. And he just has like an innovative mindset. He wants to take people up on the challenge they present to him. And yeah, against Chaos Williams, very similar to the Barberena fight. He was tuning him up for long stretches of that fight. But then he was like, oh, I've landed one counter. I'm going to hang around in the pocket and again, trying to get really cute and like slip 3 punches in a row. And there were long stretches where he just sort of forgot about like his own jab. You know, that was what was winning the fight for him. He started to just sort of let Williams dictate the exchanges and waited on him and misjudged his defensive reactions and got tagged and got hurt more than once by a big puncher. And I think having that mindset is just tough against somebody as focused and like stylistically sort of driven as Della Maddalena. Like, again, he is a pressure fighter, a good pressure fighter too, not just like many MMA pressure fighters who like, they just want to come forward. Della Maddalena has solid pressuring footwork. He can cut off the cage well. He is a very good judge of distance. And yeah, while there are ways to maybe punish the jab he usually uses, he does do a good job of getting into his range, and then he really takes advantage when he does get his range. Excellent combinations, crushing body shots, etc., etc. It just seems like for all the success Randy Brown could have, I think this is a more than winnable matchup for Randy Brown. But for all the success he could have, there are going to be points where he just lets Jack Della Maddalena back him into the cage and waits on him to set up a combination. And that's really dangerous. That is not a good idea. This is a guy who is going to, also, by the way, being a tall dude, way more of his opponents than have been should have been hunting Randy Brown's guts. They should have been swinging for his body. And you know damn well that Jack Della Maddalena is going to take him up on that ever-present opening. So, yeah, I'm going to pick Della Maddalena as well. It is a bit of recency bias. You know, I've just been so impressed with each performance of his so far. But I think it is also just the fact that there are a lot of places where Randy Brown could surprise Maddalena. There's a lot of places where I'm not entirely sure of Maddalena's quality. But the main thing I don't trust Randy Brown to do is to guide the fight into, just like Neil Magny. Like you said, I don't trust him to guide the fight into his very specific, like, winning areas, against a determined opponent who just insists on fighting his own way. So sooner or later, I think Della Maddalena is going to get him in the right position. He's going to corner him, and he is going to start absolutely brutalizing Randy's internal organs.
I think all of it is simply that, I mean, Maddalena essentially he looks like a natural.
Yeah.
It's like this comes to him very easily. He's a natural technician, and it looks like Randy Brown always looks a little bit like, yeah, he's had to think and train through everything.
Yep.
And for that reason, it's probably just the, like, physical, like, image that you get of the two of them. It does remind me a little bit of Sterling Yarn. It's like, big, tall, black guy, and the naturally gifted, like, guy who really looks like he just really looks like a boxer.
Yeah.
And fights like a boxer. And as such, you can see how Brown can win it, even without, he doesn't have Aljamain Sterling's wrestling, but what he is he's a very potent striker as well as being a very long one.
Mm-hmm.
He can counter Maddalena's jab, fill the space between them with offense of his own. Diversity of his own probably helps a good deal against someone like Maddalena, who can start a little bit slow as he tries to get his read sometimes.
Yeah.
But in general, yeah, I just do worry that Randy's also somewhat aimless from a cage-graph perspective. Eventually, he's just going to get put up against the cage and probably crushed pretty badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, winnable. Who knows? If it's that night where Randy Brown is just, super well prepared, and he just turns it on, because like we didn't say this in the Josh Emmett segment, but this is a thing to keep in mind with Josh Emmett, that you would love to look at his fight with Shane Burgos as like a concrete turning point, like a permanent turning point. where it's like, here's a guy he used to have this issue where, he's fast and he's a huge puncher, but after he surprised everyone in the first round, he would basically stop being able to hurt them because same tempo, same setups, there wasn't enough craft or subtlety or feel in his striking, and he showed that against Burgos. That's why it was so impressive. He was a very smooth, took a lot of steam off of his punches, and of course in a fight like the one he had with Michael Johnson, took him 2.5 rounds, and then he was like, I know, I'm going to just be a power puncher and not try to throw with power, and it made a huge difference. You'd love to see that as like a straight line progression, but we've seen the fight since, and it's not the case. There are still moments where Josh Emmett falls back on his baser instincts, on his natural proclivities as a fighter, and something has to happen in the fight that like reminds him that there is like it has to jump him into the right mindset where he kind of cools down and becomes a little more poised and calculating and relaxed. And then he's more technical. And so what I'm saying is that Randy Brown could have one of those nights. I think he's done it before. I think, again, his fight with Brian Barberena was a masterclass. And not exactly the same opponent, but still, that was a super consistent performance. And it could be one of those things where he has a night where he just knows exactly how he has to just stay out of these danger zones, keep Della Maddalena on the edge of the jab. When he gets too close for comfort, clinch his ass up and see if you can take him down. If not, tie him up and work his body or something. It's winnable. It's just
100%.
A matter of trust, really.
It's just
probability.
You can't. It just requires Randy Brown to be on his game for longer than we've seen.
Exactly, yeah.
Against a more potent opponent than we've seen.
Yeah. All right.
I'm definitely picking Maddalena too. But yeah, I think, again, it's another one I've become more interested in as I've looked at the tape. Because,
good matchup.
I mean, and I've always liked Randy Brown. He's always been... he's always been one of those flawed fighters who's just on the edge of being really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he's super interesting for that reason. He's almost, a lot of those, our favorite fighters, right, are more compelling because they haven't quite, like, mastered how to just force their winning fight every time. But he's definitely capable of it. So I'm very curious to see how this shakes out, and I won't be utterly shocked if he wins at all. All right, well, that will do it for this week's Heavy Hands. A very long episode. I shudder to think what runtime I'm going to be looking at when I stack these 3 segments up in order. But I think a fight like Volkanovski-Makhachev more than warranted the time we gave it. I really enjoyed that discussion. I'm really looking forward to the fight, and I hope all you listening out there feel the same. Make sure, if you haven't already, you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. I am going to do... I'm planning to do some Fedor Emelianenko commentaries, in honor of the great man's retirement. And, I'd much rather watch some of his classic hits than I would whatever it was that happened against Ryan Bader. I heard the result. Didn't watch it.
Same here.
Don't want to. Why would I?
Need to.
Yep, I get it. He got old. It happens. So head over to the Patreon. I'm going to be uploading soon some Fedor commentaries. Also, make sure you check out the Patreon for the MMA Vivisection that I do with Zane Simon, which also has the MMA Depressed Us, which, if you're not familiar, is basically our combat sports mystery science theater, where we just watch miserably bad fights and make jokes, and sometimes we pay close attention, and sometimes we don't, and we just talk shit, and occasionally we will also watch terrible B movies with MMA fighters acting in them. And these things are now being supported by Patreon as well. And I will tell you, not to sell myself short, but rather to sell myself accurately, that I have far more faith in Zane Simon to run a really functional, consistent Patreon than I do myself. So please still give me your money, but you will definitely... Your money will be in very reliable professional hands if you give it to Zane. The Vivisection and the Depressed Us are his shows more than they are mine or Phil's, and that's a good thing. So Thanks to you all for listening. Twitter, Evil Greg Jackson, Boxing Bush, you know the drill. We'll be back next week. I think, is that absolutely awful Blanchfield card, is that immediately after 284, or is that further in the future? That's further in the future. What comes up after 284?
Thing?
Is it a week
Break?
off?
I think so. No, it is directly the week afterwards, I think.
Oh my god. And they still don't have a fight for Jim Miller.
BD.
Jesus fucking Christ. So, next...
we're going to be talking about the results of UFC 284.
That's right. And maybe we'll talk a little about Aaron Blanchfield. Maybe that'll be a bonus episode. But, yes, thank you once again for listening. We will talk to you more about Volkanovski, Makhachev, and the rest of 284 next week. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
What the hell happened to you?
I don't know. I got into a sort of a Matt Berry mode with my enunciation.
You came here.
You came here today